I wonder if you ever feel left out. I certainly did as a small boy. I remember very much a football match when I suppose I was 6 or 7, when I was not chosen for either team. And I suppose at that time, for me, that was a real disaster, and I felt very much rejected. We recently had a reading in one of our Gospels, which was about people feeling very much left out. I mean, the Pharisees and the Sadducees came to Jesus, and they obviously felt that he was not taking any notice of them. And in the same reading, Jesus' mother and brothers and sisters come to see him, and they too certainly felt left out. And Jesus perhaps emphasized that by saying to everybody around him, "You who follow me, you are my brothers and my sisters and my mother." Well, I'm sure you have experienced being left out. And I wanted to talk today not only about feeling left out, but where God is in all our suffering in the world. And what about the feast of Corpus Christi, which is wonderful here in Poland, where we have big processions? What do we really feel about our praying and about going to Holy Communion? How does that help us in our lives? Well, I suppose the first thing to say about feeling left out is that we ought to speak up and say that that's how we do feel. And too often people don't express their feelings. And of course, we must always remember that our feelings are neutral. They're not good or bad, but they just are. We can't help our feelings. What we do with our feelings, of course, is what matters. We also had recently the story of Adam and Eve in the garden and eating of the forbidden fruit. And people very often say, well, where is God? Why isn't he doing something about all this suffering in the world? Well, of course, the fact is that it's not where is God, but really much more, where are we? Because in that story, and of course it is a story, and the writers and tellers of those stories in Genesis were trying to talk not about the creation of the world and how it all happened, but much more about the relationship between people and their relationship with each other and with God. And the question is not really where is God, but where are we? Where are you? And where am I? And the Bible is really a book about relationships. The most important thing for happiness and fulfilling our lives as Christians is that happiness comes, of course, from building good relationships with each other and a good relationship with God. And of course, we want good relationships, not only for ourselves, but for others. And a great sadness and a great danger is that sometimes, because of our prejudices and because of our blindness and our own unfulfilled needs and our insecurities, we see good relationships, perhaps people not married living together, perhaps people of very different ages, very happy together, or people of the same sex supporting, loving each other, and doing everything to have a very fulfilling relationship. And the great danger, the great sadness is that we are not willing to acknowledge it because of problems within ourselves. Well, what about Corpus Christi? And how does Corpus Christi and celebrating the Last Supper and the Holy Communion, how does that fit into it all? Well, when we take communion, we are doing it once more and in a sense one less, because it's one less for us and it's once less celebrating communion before the kingdom of God comes. And communion, in a way, is God's gift of love to us. It's an everlasting movement of his love towards us and towards all creation. And we are called to respond, as in all relationships, and really this is the start of good relationships, isn't it? We're called to respond with thankfulness and by returning that love. And of course, the love which we know is God in the world is not only universal for everybody, but also it's individual. It's for us. But especially, I think, on the day when we celebrate Corpus Christi, as we did here in Poland very recently, is that it's a time to remember all those we love, living and departed, as well as ourselves, as we open ourselves to that wonderful love that God gives to us and respond by saying thank you. I wonder if you say grace before meals. Sadly, it doesn't seem to happen so often to say thank you. Thank you for all the many blessings of our life, not only this food, but our families and our friends and all the many blessings we receive day by day. But perhaps we ought to get used to saying thank you, not just before meals, but before all that we do. Before we leave the house in the morning and go to work, or before we get on a tram, or before we go to a concert, before we go to bed. And perhaps we should remember to say thank you before we start writing a sermon or starting to take a service. And Holy Communion is not just about the transforming of bread and wine, the gifts of God to us, not only about transforming them, but it's about transforming ourselves, about holding ourselves and feeling the presence of love and responding to that love by giving love and by giving thanks. And if we do that, we will find that we become transformed as well. There's a little saying which says, bread for myself is a material matter, but bread for my neighbour is a spiritual matter. And what matters when we come to communion and what matters when we say our prayers is, what do we do next? Because we come to communion, we come as individuals and as a family, and the question is, what do we do next? And what matters in our lives is not only saying that we love God and we love our families and we love the people around us, and indeed that we love ourselves, but what matters is what we do next. Do we hide from God like Adam and Eve did in the garden? Do we hide from our neighbours? Do we hide from ourselves? Or do we open ourselves? Do we open ourselves to love, to the presence of the risen Christ, the nearer presence of the love of God? God is with you now, and he will be with you every moment of your life. But the question is, where are you? And what do you do next? There's the words of a modern hymn, which I'm going to use just to finish off what I'm saying, and you will know it, I'm sure. Here I am, Lord. Is it I, Lord? I have heard you calling in the night. I will go, Lord, if you lead me. I will hold your people in my heart. May God bless you very greatly.